Welcome back. I did an analysis on all 32 NFL teams and how their coaches affect your fantasy football team. Today's lesson, the Green Bay Packers. So, did they make any coaching changes this offseason? Nope. What changes did they make in free agency, the draft, and so on? The only two things that really stuck out to me were really in the draft and that in itself. And that is Lucas Van Ness, who apparently Bill Belichick was extremely high on, and Jayden Reed. And the reason I think that Lucas Van Ness is particularly interesting because of Bill Belichick is because he's the defensive mastermind. If he is extremely high on a prospect, then we likely should be too. The reason I'm particularly optimistic about Jayden Reed is because the Packers' history of drafting receivers in the second round is typically pretty strong. Now, looking at the coaching side of things, we have more of an offensive front, as we've known. We have Matt LaFleur and Adam Stenavich. And then we still have Joe Barry running the defense. Matt LaFleur is particularly known with his work with the quarterbacks, this team with his time with the Redskins, the Falcons, the Rams, the Titans, the Packers. Moving over to Adam Stenavich, he's particularly known with his offensive line work, which I think is kind of interesting to have as an OC. Last year was his first year really running that OC role by himself, and I think more than anything, there was just a lot of chemistry issues with Aaron Rodgers more than anything. He wanted out, they wanted something else, it just didn't work. And for the guy who really likes offensive lines when it comes to fantasy, this is something I really like to see. But now that we've laid the foundation for exactly how the Packers have attacked this offseason, we can start to dive into how it impacts our individual fantasy teams. But before we do that, we need to see exactly how the guys upstairs have the Green Bay Packers projected to go about this season and give our knowledge a little bit more structure. The Green Bay Packers are expected to take a step back here and really only supposed to get somewhere between 7 and 8 wins. It is very easy to be on the pessimistic side of this. But on the flip side of the coin, I think you can actually be a little bit more optimistic than you realize. Do I think the Packers are going to be first in this division? No. But do I think there's a reality where they could be second? Yes. But why exactly do I say that? Because there's really not a lot of basis to be like, this team's going to be great. 1, we know I'm a big believer on chemistry. 2, look exactly what they did this offseason. With a team that's supposed to take a massive step back, you would expect them to make some moves to kind of prepare to get away from Jordan Love in theory, right? Why didn't they do that? If anything, they worked on their defense a bit more in free agency. Like, this is the same strong team, but with a new quarterback at the helm. Now, you and I can debate a little bit later on whether we think that Jordan Love is good or bad, but we're going to say that a little bit later, all right? But don't you find that a little bit intriguing that general management was basically like, we like what we have here. We're not really going to change anything to it. I don't know. Like, maybe I'm stupid for thinking that, but like, that's something that I'm kind of like, interesting. And I think it's pretty widely known at this point that Aaron Rodgers and the Packers did not get along this past season. So now you got a guy like Jordan Love coming in. I'm optimistic. I don't know if this is the most popular theory at this point in time, but I think it is starting to get a little bit of traction to it. And that is Brett Favre went to the Jets and then performed actually really well there before the injury and then went to the Vikings the next season. And I think there's a very kind of similar pattern to this that's starting to get a little bit of traction to it, and that is Brett Favre going to the Jets, performing really well there in reality prior to his injury, and then going to the Vikings and doing whatever he did there. And then you can theoretically say there's a similar trend line with someone like Aaron Rodgers, because apparently there's like some supposed contract stipulations. I don't know what it exactly it is. But I think there's a little bit more smoke going on with that New York Jets team that people are willing to admit, but we'll see when time comes. So it's basically using a one quarterback switch, say a good sample size? No. But am I a little bit optimistic from what I personally see? Yes. So now that we've got a really strong understanding of the general direction in which the Green Bay Packers are built towards this season, we can figure out exactly how Matt LaFleur and Adam Stenavich affect our overall fantasy teams. Starting off with the quarterback position, and that is Jordan Love. Going off the coaching trends here, it looks like the quarterback's actually going to perform pretty well, and to me, he passed the eye test. I really liked what I saw him do against the Philadelphia Eagles this past year, and I think he's a little bit of the real deal. And realistically, I'm just going to be paraphrasing exactly what Steve Smith Sr. said on his podcast. Jordan Love had about 2 to 3 offensive coordinators at Utah State. It's like having to learn a new language each and every single year. That's not easy, but he still got drafted in the first round. Isn't that a bit odd? And now he's been studying and learning under the system of Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur and yada, yada, yada. And what I saw in that Philadelphia game, at least me personally, I thought he looked good. And I think a big reason why we saw Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs and like these really younger guys play poorly was because they were scared they were going to fail to meet that expectation that Aaron Rodgers is trying to hold them to. And when you're in a new system where it's kind of a prove-it year for someone like Jordan Love, I don't see a reason for these receivers to be so much as scared anymore. I know this is not a fair take to really put on someone, but like Aaron Rodgers I see as a bit of a diva. And when you're a new guy coming into the starting role like Jordan Love is, you're more than likely going to listen to the guy talking in your ear of Matt LaFleur. And from what I mentioned earlier, it doesn't seem like Aaron Rodgers and the Packers organization really got along last year. I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic about this Packers team than a lot of other people are. I think Matt LaFleur could easily be a coach of the year candidate and a really nice long shot if you really want to look at it, kind of how it all goes together. Think about week 17 when they play against the Vikings. That's a very big prove-it game for them in that division specifically, especially if things are tight like we think they are going to be. So I really think that a 17 fantasy point per game base is a very safe estimate. And yes, that does mean he is very undervalued in drafts at this particular second time and really on Prediction Strike just as well. And as you can see, I've already established a position there because I think there's going to be a lot more upside than people are expecting. A lot of people are preying on this Packers team downfall, and I don't know, man, they might be here to stay. Moving over to the RB1, and that is Aaron Jones. I mean, the RB1 in this backfield has typically been absolutely dominant. It seems to be kind of an overall like flat trend, and I don't know. The only thing that really concerns me here is potentially the age drop off, but I also watched a study today that says that's not as dramatic as people think it might be, but I'm not going to go here nor there on my overall opinion of that. I'm going to say Aaron Jones is theoretically going to be the primary starting guy, and this is still going to be a bit of a committee. I think going off of the age more than anything, a 15 fantasy point per game average seems a very safe estimate. Could Aaron Jones blow his projection out of the water? Yes. But since I don't think this is really going to leave that committee field, I want to stick with a safer base at this second in time. Moving over to the RB2, and that is A.J. Dillon. As we can see here, it's really averaging close to that 10 to 11 fantasy point range, and I really overdrafted him last year because I thought he was going to come into this Packers offense and truly be the RB1. I was wrong. Do I think he's got a higher chance of doing that this year based on age more than anything? Yes. Am I theoretically going to be investing in that heavily? No. So realistically, my current position on A.J. Dillon is neutral at this particular time, and I still think that 10 to 11 fantasy point per game average is a safe estimate. Moving over to the theoretical wide receiver 1 here, and that is Christian Watson. Now, we all know the RAS scores that's going on with Christian Watson, and to me, I'm not too worried about him losing this wide receiver 1 spot. But I did find Steve Smith Sr.'s comments about him particularly interesting. But in terms of fantasy, I still think he's likely going to be that guy. The wide receiver 1 typically tries to do extremely well in this offense, and there's a genuine chance that he could be averaging a 20 fantasy point per game type of premium. Albeit that is with Aaron Rodgers at the helm, so we can't really hold too much to that, with Davante Adams primarily being that guy throughout the years. But based on the overall upside in the games that we did see last year, it is most certainly possible. Now, am I going to be buying into it? Potentially. It all depends on exactly where I'm at in my positioning in these drafts and kind of where he's projected to be at the time on Prediction Strike of where I'm going to be buying him. But I think a 16 to 17 fantasy point per game average is a very safe floor that we can kind of estimate for whoever the wide receiver 1 ends up being in this offense, because I do believe that there's a chance that Romeo Doubs could be in that role from a reception perspective at least. But in terms of yak, Christian Watson should be your guy. I mean, look at that pass that him and Jordan Love connected on against the Eagles. It was nice. Moving over to the wide receiver 2, and that theoretically should be Romeo Doubs. Going off the charts here, it looks to be in an overall uptrend, and we're getting kind of some preemptive training camp hype about Romeo Doubs potentially being the main target guy for someone like Jordan Love, but I don't want to buy too much into this particular second in time. I believe there's a lot of fluff stories to kind of garner our attention as fantasy managers and be like, ooh, look at that shiny thing. But like, that's not really the overall case and scenario that's going to be too true. It's also when I see a Packers beat reporter comparing him to Davante Adams, I'm immediately like, okay, let's pump our brakes. I don't think they're in that same realm, but who knows? Maybe I'm extremely wrong, and this part of the segment will age extremely poorly. But for me, I've got him really more in that 11 to 12 fantasy point per game range, really around that 11.5 mark. Moving over to the wide receiver 3, and that is Jayden Reed. Now, this is a guy that could actually end up being the wide receiver 2 by the time the season's over. As we can see off the chart here, it's in an overall uptrend, which is really nice to see. Going with a base of 9 fantasy points per game, I think that's a very safe estimate for someone like Jayden Reed, who will likely be in this role. Considering he's going undrafted in most drafts, I'm probably going to take a couple long shots on him. The kid's nice with it, and I really don't have too much to say on it. The Packers typically draft wide receivers pretty well. Moving over to the tight end position, and that is not the most optimistic spot to be in if you're a Green Bay Packers tight end. It's in an overall downtrend. I think Luke Musgrave is fine, but he's somebody I'm going to be avoiding in pretty much every single fantasy draft, and I just don't have the overall upside for him. For me, he's an 8 fantasy point per game player. So just to recap a little bit, I'm pretty much more optimistic about the Green Bay Packers than a lot of people. I think what they went about in free agency / the draft was very intriguing in terms of a management perspective. Like, why wouldn't you kind of address the theoretical holes that everyone's talking about more than they actually are? To not kind of go about getting a replacement for Jordan Love is just kind of like, all right, they're either going to be tanking in theory, or they're going to be like, we kind of believe in this guy, we're going to build around him. So for me, I'm personally more optimistic about this team than most, but we'll see exactly how it fares out by the end of the season. Consensus has them landing 4th in this division. I definitely think that is a reality, but based on the moves in the offseason and agency and the numbers I'm seeing, I think we have a lot more reason to be optimistic than bearish. So we'll see how it all goes. As always, drop your fantasy football questions down below and make sure to answer them as quickly as possible. And if you enjoyed this content or find the series relatively interesting, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. We got a video coming tomorrow on the Houston Texans. Thank y'all once again, and peace.